Welcome to the City Current Show, powered by Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services.
This show focuses on sharing good news and powering the good in our community. Now here's your host, City Current CEO, Jeremy Park.
Welcome to the City Current Show, powered by Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference and powering the good. And that's why we're excited to be talking about No Fail Trust. We're honored to have with us U.S. Air Force retired Lt Col Jason Harris, founder of No Fail Trust Solutions. How are you doing?
It is a fantastic day to be alive. Thanks so much for asking, Jeremy, and I appreciate you having me on the show today.
Well, thank you first for your service. When you talk about serving in the U.S. Air Force, and really not just for you, but your family, you come from a legacy of those who serve. Thank you for sure. Let's start with the service, because I think that will lead us into you as a keynote speaker, all the amazing things you're doing with No Fail Trust Solutions. So give us some background on your end, especially tied to serving at the U.S. Air Force.
Yeah, so I am fourth generation military. And my mother served in the military, my grandfather served in the military. And for me, growing up, that's all I knew. When I looked at my life and I did a review of my life, in my entire existence, I have only been without access to a military installation 1 year out of my entire life, which is insane. So it was part of my DNA. And I grew up with my mother enlisting in the Army to get us out of Oakland. And she was enlisted in the Army. And my mother would say, son, if you're going to go in the military, go in the Air Force. Son, if you're going to go in the military, go in as an officer. And of all the trouble that I got into, I listened to her those 2 times, and it worked out fairly well for me.
Well, give us some background, because when you talk about being an aviator, and this will lead us into some of the things that you talk about, especially around turbulence and navigating through and trust. When you talk about going in and flying into a combat zone, you've got to trust your team. And so you know all this firsthand. Give us a little bit of what that experience was like as a pilot.
Flying airplanes, the interesting thing is most people, they think that I grew up wanting to be a pilot. I didn't. I didn't even know that being a pilot was a possibility for me growing up. And so when I got to the Air Force Academy, I was very fortunate, very blessed and humbled and honored to go to the Air Force Academy. Then I was exposed to pilots, and I was like, wait a minute, I have the chance to be a pilot. I started meeting original Tuskegee Airmen. I started meeting current Air Force pilots and realized that I could potentially become a pilot in the Air Force. And once I went down that path of becoming a pilot, I realized that this was pretty challenging. It was extremely hard. It was a lot of work. And it was like going through pilot training. It was the equivalent of getting a PhD and a master's degree at the same time, all in a 12-month span. And so it really pushed me to my limits. It really challenged me, and it really challenged what I was actually capable of mentally and physically. And when I got to the other side of realizing that dream of becoming a pilot, it was one of the coolest experiences ever. And that's when then the journey started of just really learning to become the best that I could be, not just as a pilot, but as a leader as well, in and out of the airplane.
What led you to become a guest speaker?
People love to ask me that question. And, I graduated the Air Force Academy in 2001. I served on active duty until 2013. And my last active duty job, I was teaching at the Air Force Academy. I was teaching seniors in strategy and innovation for the Military and Strategic Studies Department. And I remember going back to the academy, and I was really concerned with being in the classroom in front of these really, really smart, sharp cadets. And so I said, I need to learn how to ensure that I can speak very clearly, very succinctly, without the ums and the ahs. And I started down the path of getting into Toastmasters. And then from there, one of the gentlemen who was a good friend of mine, he said, hey, let me introduce you to this other environment about professional speaking. I was like, what? He was like, yes, you can get paid to speak. But underlying, like behind the scenes on that, Jeremy, that most people that I don't talk about a lot, was I went through a couple of leadership programs. And there was this one program that was held at the Center for Creative Leadership in Colorado. And they did all these personality assessments. And the coach evaluator, she pulls me aside. She says, do you realize how unique you are? And I thought, man, people have told me that all my life. I don't necessarily put an excess value on that anymore. She goes, no. Let me show you what the paper says. let me show you what your personality assessments say. And in that moment, what I realized, Jeremy, is that I did have a gift. And so that started me down that pathway of saying, how do I use my mind, my voice, my heart, my talent, my gifts to impact others in a positive, meaningful way? And that was kind of the beginning of my journey to become a professional keynote speaker.
Tie that into no-fail trust solutions. So give us some background on that, because this will then carry us into some of the things that you talk about with the model and how do you build trust for the team so that you don't fail. So talk about no-fail trust solutions.
Yeah, so that same friend that I talked about from Toastmasters, he told me, he says, hey, get on a podcast with me. And I thought, man, I am not your guy. I had not hung my shingle yet as a professional speaker, didn't know what I was going to talk about. He says, let's just have a conversation. And as we were having the conversation, he was asking me various questions with regards to leadership and my experiences. And I told him a story that to me was just something that was normal every day in the military, in the airplane, and in aviation. He says, no, stop right there. He goes, right there, that is a piece of information that organizations would pay for because what you guys do in the military is powerful. And I thought it was a normal story. But what he helped me to uncover and to realize was that that model of how we build a level of trust and empowerment for this young person in the back of my airplane was critical. And in that moment, I began to build on that, realizing that we did that every day in the Air Force. We did that every day flying airplanes. And from there, I began to understand and unpack the framework of what I had been doing my entire military career, which was trusted training, trusted processes that allows us to empower and trust our people and build that level of trust like our businesses and our lives depend on it every single day.
You also do consulting with businesses. And so when you're stepping in and trying to get a pulse for where they are, where they want to go, what are the things that you're looking at, especially around the training, the process? Like, what are you looking at? What questions are you asking to get a sense of where they are and where they want to go with this?
You know, one of the number one things I want to know about is how do they communicate? You know, my team, we led a study tied to the 2022 census. And when we led that study, what we learned, we looked at leadership. We looked at psychological safety. We looked at communication. We looked at connection. We looked at trust. We looked at all these elements. And the number one thing, the theme that resonated throughout all of these sections was communication. And so for me, when I'm speaking to a client, when it comes to consulting, advisory services, I want to know, what is the communication like in that organization? And then the second thing I want to know about is I want to know about what does their leadership team look like and what are the challenges that their leadership team is dealing with, because your culture of the organization is dictated primarily by leadership. And if there's issues and challenges in the leadership, then you're going to have issues and challenges throughout your organization and throughout your organizational culture. And that is also highlighted by how they communicate and or do not communicate effectively within that organization.
Carry that into, and obviously communication is so critical to this in terms of what I'm going to ask, but in a world where you have talent retention challenges because people are, quick to jump for a new opportunity, more pay, more purpose, you're having issues with companies finding the right talent but retaining them. But then when you look at building trust, right, like an accountability, and how do you galvanize a team to punch through the wall to achieve these sort of breakthrough results? How do you kind of look at where we are in the world right now with the generational shifts, the cultural shifts, the challenges on one side, but then obviously the need for trust to be able to achieve success?
Trust is absolutely essential in any organization. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many generations are in the workplace. It doesn't matter how young or how old or mature those workers are in the organization. We have to create a level of trust throughout the organization. And when it comes to talent acquisition, that starts with people getting an inside view on our organization to determine, is this a place that they can see themselves with? And then once they come in the door, the talent retention is going to be dependent upon what the culture looks like. And in that culture, what that culture looks like, they're looking at, do I trust the people that I'm working with? Can I trust what they say? Can I trust their actions? Is this an environment that's built on trust? And when I talk about trust, Jeremy, I talk about two different types of trust. There's relational trust, which is about our relationships. And then there's the other side of trust, which is more about our technical skills and capabilities. And so even foundationally, when it comes to our technical skills and abilities, often what we see in organizations where they have a hard time with talent retention is because they bring someone in, and the number one thing that they will do is they will just say, hey, go figure it out. And instead of them actually training the person, they basically say you're empowered. And when you do that, you set that person up for failure. And now that person is afraid to speak up. They don't feel like they have a level of psychological safety. They don't feel like they have a level of training. And now they're afraid to try because this job that they've been placed in can potentially be a dangerous environment. And potentially it's life and death. Meanwhile, they realize that they don't have the training and they're afraid to say something. And so you put all of that together in a recipe, and that's a recipe for disaster. And now that person says, okay, I don't have the trust. I don't want to build the connections. I don't feel comfortable speaking up. And oh, by the way, I don't feel like I have the right training. So therefore, I'm completely uncomfortable. I'm out of my element. And it's best that I find another place to get comfortable in, because this is not the place, because it doesn't provide me a level of trust, psychological safety. They don't communicate well. All of those pieces that are part of that the ingredients, that puzzle that creates that environment that actually drives talent retention.
These are all things that you tie into your keynotes: the psychological safety, the process, the training for no fails trust, for, even looking at everything from imposter syndrome and tying all these elements, turbulence. And you look at that parallel around, obviously flying through combat zones and being a commercial pilot to then, how does that tie in with business turbulence? But maybe give us one other thing when you look at your keynotes. Give us a fun takeaway, a story that ties into your keynotes.
Yeah, one of the number one story that I love telling, Jeremy, is the signature keynote story, and that is my go-around story. Now, when I talk about that go-around story, what I want people to be thinking about is the crew environment of this airplane. So imagine that C-130, we have a combat crew of 6 individuals, and in the back of the airplane, we have often the youngest person in the aircraft. That's our load master. That load master, they might be 17, 18, 19 years old, fresh out of high school, video game expert, possibly dwelling in someone's attic or in their basement. And we've hired them to be in the back of that airplane as a critical crew member. And the beauty is that they're responsible for more than 80% of that airplane. And in being responsible for more than 80% of that airplane, they're responsible for loading the aircraft, deciding how to load it, deciding how to tie things down, deciding where things go. And if they don't do their job correctly, then when we take off and possibly get to the landing, catastrophic things can happen. But then I put people in the seat of that airplane with me, and I have them imagining that they're flying a combat mission with me. And as we're getting ready to make the perfect landing into a combat landing zone, we're a few feet off the runway, and that load master who can't see out of the front of the airplane says, go around. And when they say those magic words, I, the aircraft commander, the CEO of that airplane, I don't hesitate, I don't pause, I don't question that young person. I immediately add full power to the airplane, bring it to 7 degrees nose high, climb away from whatever the danger is. And it's not until we're safely away from whatever that dangerous environment is that I will ask that young person, why did we go around? And that young person will precisely say, pilot, the reason I commanded you and directed you, the CEO of this airplane, to go around was because I could see what you were unable to see. And what I drive home to the audience is that so often in our organizations, we have these young, these new, these inexperienced team members that are seeing things that we are unable to see. And it is only by way of the right training, trusted processes, and true empowerment that I can trust that load master when they command me to go around, that I will execute that go around and they will save all of our lives. And I then challenge the audience to think about, who are the load masters in your organization? Who are the people that are able to see what you are unable to see?
I love it. And this is one of those conversations you and I could go on forever, but let's go ahead and wrap up with contact information. So where do we go to learn more about your speaking, to book you, to look at the consulting? So when you talk about carrying these conversations forward, where do we go?
Go to nofailtrust.com, nofailtrust.com. nofailtrust.com. You can find all the information about my services. If you want to email me directly, reach out, Jason, Jason, at nofailtrust.com.
Well, Jason Harris, thank you for all you do to power the good. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, my friend. Blue skies, fair winds, and all the best.
Higginbotham Insurance and Financial Services is proud to power the City Current Show. We're a people-first company that protects what matters most, the families, businesses, and trailblazers that keep our community going. As one of the nation's top independent insurance firms, Higginbotham is a single-source solution for business insurance, employee benefits, HR services, and personal insurance that's customized for you. We're here to serve you, the people you care about, and your community. Call 866-377-1959 or visit higginbotham.com.